She was a slave of Prophet Muhammad's parents. After the death of his mother, she buried her with her own hands and helped to raise the Prophet, who viewed and treated her as a mother. When he received the call to prophethood, she immediately declared her allegiance and support. She was the only companion who was close to him from his birth till his death. She was Barakah, better known as Ayman. Radiallahu anha.
Wassalamu wa Rasulullah. Welcome to our series on the heroines of Islam. And this is the class wherein what I do is I'll take the stories. I'm taking the names of the female companions, some of the ones that you are most familiar with and some that you may not be familiar with. And what I'm doing is giving you the stories based on the hadiths, the authentic hadiths about these women in Islam. And the whole purpose of me teaching this series is not only to educate you as to the type of character that the companions had, but for you sisters here, because so many of you sisters suffer with what your role should be as a Muslim woman, as a Muslim wife, a mother. And so I'm showing you, that a lot of the things, a lot of you are converts. I'm in several new Muslim groups here that they've added me to. A lot of you, when you embark upon this religion, unfortunately, you end up hooking up with people who give you a bad understanding of your way of life, especially if you're a woman. This is one of the signs of the last hour. Islam will become strange. It will revert to being like it used to be before Islam and before the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam received the call to prophethood. Women didn't have any rights. Islam liberated women. Islam gave women rights they never had before. Islam let it be known that women are not special creatures, that women are human beings too. We feel, we feel, we believe, we have hopes and aspirations just like a man does. So I'm giving you these female stories to try to change these misconceptions that you have as a Muslim woman, many of you who are new to this religion and some who were born Muslim. Okay, you will find that these Muslim women played an active role in the development of Islam. They were right there with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They were even on the battlefield, as I've proven to you. These women were also on the battlefield helping, to establish Islam. Some of them worked as nurses, but not all of them. Some were warriors too. Maymunah, radiallahu anha, the wife of the Prophet, was a warrior. She came from a warrior family of women. And she was on the battlefield fighting. Okay? Salama, radiallahu anha, was another wife of the Prophet. She was the first cousin of Khalid bin Walid. She was trained in the art of warfare. She was a military strategist, and she was a genius. And she was on that battlefield too. She wasn't just sitting up at home. She participated in every battle that the Prophet had. She was on the battlefield. She would raise her sword if need be. The Prophet didn't want her to. Most of the time he would tell her, just stay in the tent and advise me. But if she saw the odds, especially when her cousin Khalid bin Walid converted to Islam. When Khalid bin Walid converted to Islam, she kept her eye on her husband, as Khalid bin Walid kept his eye on them both. And she would stand back to back with Khalid bin Walid protecting the Prophet, fighting with her sword. So there's a lot of misconceptions that a lot of these men and women too tell you about women in Islam, that we don't participate in warfare. That's garbage. Even Sauda. What did Aisha radiallahu anha say? Sauda would go and retrieve information. She would go and gather information to bring back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, these women were there with the men, helping to pave the way for us. And I'm going to do the story today of a great woman of Islam. A lot of you ask about colors. I don't know why that's so important. None of the Prophet's wives were black in color. When I mean that, they were not African black in color like some of you want to, you try to look for a hero or something. I don't know. All his wives were Arab, except for Safiya. She was Hebrew. But the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was raised by an African Ethiopian woman. He loved her. In fact, he loved her so much he called her mother. He called her his mother. Not only that, I'm going to bring forth to you the authentic evidence too, that she too participated in the battles. She participated like all the other women did in the battles that the Muslims fought against the Quraysh. Her participation was similar to Sauda's. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam utilized her to seek out information. Even before the Muslims migrated to Medina, this woman who raised him, who he referred to as his mother, she would sacrifice herself and go out and seek out information as to what the Quraysh were planning. This woman whose story I'm going to give you today, her name was Barakah Ayman. She was the woman who raised the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as with every class I teach on this topic, all my evidence is taken from the authentic hadiths. Nothing is made up. Nothing is imagined. It's just that we have to learn this deen correctly. We have to learn about these companions. We have to stop allowing people to only give us tidbits of information. And we need to go out and seek the knowledge to get the full information. And then there would be no need for you sisters to be calling yourselves feminists. There would be no need for you Muslim women to feel like you are deprived, depraved, and oppressed. I tell y'all all the time, it's a sad reality, yet it is reality. A person can only do to you what you allow them to do. A person can only keep you stagnant if you allow it. A person can only strip you of your womanhood if you allow it. A person can only deceive you if you allow it. Seeking knowledge of this religion is an obligation upon all Muslims, male and female. So let's put the PowerPoint up on the screen, and I want you guys to sit back and listen, because we're going to learn about a beautiful woman. She may not have been beautiful in appearance to some of you, because some of the companions didn't find her beautiful in appearance. But she was more beautiful than any of us in character, any of us in deeds and morality. So give me a second here. For those of you on Zoom, and so for those of you listening on the other platform, let me put my name down too. So that way, if you want to, feel free to screenshot any of this information. If you want to screenshot the pages as I'm teaching, feel free to do so. That's why I'm taking the name down so you guys can do that. And I'm not using my background. I have the whole screen here so you can take a big screenshot of everything because I want you guys to know about this female companion. Okay. Zoom, let me share. And for those of you on YouTube, just give me a second. I'm setting it up for Zoom first. So you're going to see me sharing to them. And it's going to freeze, but don't worry. That's just temporary. Okay. That's just temporary, inshallah. Give me a second. Okay. Open up my PowerPoint, so that's why it's frozen. Okay, now, inshallah, people on Zoom, you should get to see me and not the black screen. And the people on, Zeep on Zoom, you should get to see this and not the back screen. Not now. Not now. Okay, hold on. Here it is. Now, this goes, and here I come. Screen should be visible. Okay, everybody should be able to see my PowerPoint. Okay, and people on Zoom, if y'all don't talk, I'm not going to worry about you guys.
We see it, Sister Layla. It's good.
Y'all don't see, y'all still see that frozen screen on Zoom?
Yeah, it is on Zoom.
That's what I'm saying. Look at Zoom. I need y'all to talk to me on Zoom. Okay, wait a minute. Oh, you know what? I see why it's frozen. Okay, now here we go. Hold on. Okay, let me open up Zoom again. Wait a minute. Zoom. We go here. Okay, now y'all should see this, inshallah. Okay, y'all see the PowerPoint now on Zoom, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Like I say, if y'all don't talk to me, I'm going to just say forget y'all. Okay, seriously. Okay, so this is our story for today, the companion that we're going to be doing today. This is the story of Barakah, radiallahu anha. Okay? And when you guys saw the introduction, the video, for those of you who saw the video that I put out last night of this female companion, I wanted to play a little, trick with you guys. I used 3 women and I gave the introduction about her, how she was raised the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She's the only companion that was with him from birth till death, and I had 3 different color shaded women, a light woman, a Arab woman, and a dark woman. And a lot of people thought it was going to be that first one, and then bam, at the end, it was the dark woman. Okay, because she was dark in color. I did that on purpose. I hope that the people got that. So let's talk about this woman. Her name was Barakah. Okay. We do not know exactly how this young girl, she was from Abyssinia. Abyssinia today is known as Ethiopia, but it covered a lot more. For those of you who don't know, Somalia was also part of Abyssinia back then. Okay, all of that part where Ethiopia is stretching all the way down to Somalia, that was all part of Abyssinia back in these days. And she was a girl who was up for sale in Mecca. She was a little girl, perhaps around the age of 7. They say around the age of 7 or 8, she was up for sale in the marketplace. Back in those days before Islam, slavery existed. Okay. So we don't know much about her roots as in regards to her ancestors, because she was too young to remember too when she was captured and taken as a slave. All we know is that she was a dark woman, a Black African woman. And there were many others like her, Arabs and non-Arabs, who back in the medieval period were captured and brought to the slave markets to be sold, not just in Arabia, but all over the world. The Romans, the Greeks, the Persians. Whenever the people would fight a war, the women and children, like I told you guys before, in the medieval period, the women would go out with the men because whoever was the victor would take the women and children as slaves. So this was common back in that day. But she was fortunate because when she was brought to Mecca at the slave market to be sold, she was purchased, by a man named Abdullah, who was the son of a great chief whose name was Abdul Muttalib. And Abdullah, as those of you know, was the father of the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he bought her and took her home with him, and he got married. He immediately married. He married a woman named Aminah, who became the mother of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's why he bought the girl, because he knew he was getting married, and he wanted to buy a slave that would be able to look out after the household affairs. And he wanted somebody young, like she was. She was a little kid. He wanted a young girl so she could be trained properly as to how to help, the woman around the house and all of that, and also provide companionship as well. So 2 weeks after Abdullah and Aminah were married, and this came from the hadith of Barakah. Barakah tells us this story out of her own mouth. She says 2 weeks after the couple were married, the man came to the house. The man's father, Abdul Muttalib, came to the house and instructed his son, Abdullah, to leave with a caravan and go to Syria to purchase some goods, because that's how they earned their profession. They were merchants. They would travel from Mecca to other parts of the world to buy and trade and sell things. So Barakah tells us that Abdullah's wife, Aminah, became so sad because she had just gotten married. They'd only been married for a couple of weeks. And she began to cry. She said, how strange, how strange. How can you send my husband away on a journey when I just became a bride? I still have the henna on my hands. Okay, like I told you, makeup is nothing new. Women have been wearing makeup since Allah created Eve. Henna is a makeup. And by the way, henna was not just used to paint your nails with. Henna was not just used to dye your hair with. Henna was also used for the lips. Henna was also used to color the cheeks and other things too. It's a makeup like it is today. So anyway, she had only been married for 2 weeks approximately. And Aminah was very sad because, here she was, didn't even have a chance to enjoy life as a wife. But Abdullah obeyed his father and he left. And after he left, Barakah tells us that Aminah fainted. That's how distressed she was. She was so heartbroken. We talked about the broken heart. Broken heart comes as a result of stress. Okay, she was so sad, so stressed at her husband leaving her, that she fainted. And when Barakah saw her mistress faint, she began to shout out. She said, "Oh lady, oh lady." And she said, Aminah opened her eyes and looked at her. And she had tears running down her face. And she said, "Help me, just help me to my bed, Barakah." So that's how broken heart Aminah was, which I'm sure I would have been the same way. You know, any of us as women would have felt the same way. You were newly married, only been married less than 2 weeks, and here your husband has to go on a long journey. So Aminah was so sick and so heartbroken that she stayed in the bed for a long time. She couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. We talked in our Ask Sister Layla live show last Friday. What are some of the signs of a broken heart? Some of the signs of a broken heart is you lose your appetite. Some of the signs of a broken heart is that all you want to do is just stay in the bed. Another sign of a broken heart is you go into depression. And that's what happened to Aminah. She stayed in the bed. She wouldn't eat. She wouldn't talk. She just became depressed. And she wouldn't allow anyone to come and visit her except her father-in-law, Abdul Muttalib. Barakah goes on to tell us that 2 months had passed. 2 months had passed. And Aminah was still sick. She was still bedridden. And Barakah tells us that she sat down with Aminah and she talked to her. And Aminah told her, she said, "Oh, Barakah, I just had a strange dream." And Barakah said, she said, "Well, I hope the dream you had was something good, my lady." She said, Aminah told her, "In the dream, I saw light coming from my stomach. And the light was so bright that it lit up the mountains and the valleys around Mecca." When she told Barakah that, Barakah could only imagine, well, maybe you're pregnant. So she asked of the lady, she said, "My lady, do you think you might be pregnant?" And that's when Aminah paused for a minute and she said, "Yes, Barakah, yes. Maybe that's why. Maybe that's what's wrong with me." She said, "But it's different." She said, "I don't feel any discomfort that the other women complain about feeling." And Barakah says she looked at her mistress and told her, "Well, maybe that means you're going to give birth to a blessed child who's going to bring good things into your life." So here we can see the lady Aminah had only been married for 2 weeks, but in that short time, that's all it took for her to get pregnant. But unfortunately, her husband was still away on this journey trying to sell his merchants. And so Aminah remained sad because she couldn't share her happy news with him. Barakah tells us that she stayed at her mistress's side, comforting her, trying to make her happy. And she said one of the things she used to do is tell her stories. You know, the Arabs were an illiterate people. They couldn't read. They couldn't write, most of them. I told you guys, even Aisha, radiallahu anha, didn't know how to read or write. But one thing the Arabs enjoyed was poetry and storytelling. They would sit around telling stories about things. And this is what Barakah did. Barakah stayed by her mistress's side, telling her stories, you know, to try to make her feel good. But even that didn't really cheer her up. All she wanted was her husband. All she wanted was to have her husband standing before her so she could tell him of the joy that she carried in her stomach. Barakah goes on to tell us that one day Abdul Muttalib came to the home of Aminah and told her that she had to leave. She had to leave the home. She couldn't stay in the bed any longer. She had to get up and go to the mountains because Mecca was under attack. The ruler of Yemen, whose name was Abraha, was launching an attack against the Arabs in Mecca. Aminah told him that she was too sick and too weak to move. And she said, I really don't believe that Abraha can enter Mecca and destroy the Kaaba because Allah protects it. And this is what I want to talk about with you guys for a second. So let me put my screen share down. It's okay. You'll see me and no, you won't. You won't see me. I forgot I got the Zoom thing going up. Okay, hold on. Let me just talk to you guys about it. I want to talk about this. This is a very important point. Just give me a second. I'm going to figure it. Okay, hold on. Zoom is going down for a second. Okay, that's me. Okay, now let me come in on Zoom. Because this is very, very important. There I am. Okay, and here, Zoom, go. Okay, now inshallah, you guys should see me. This is very important. When we testify to la ilaha illallah, we're not testifying just that we believe that Allah is the only Allah. We're also testifying that he's the only one worthy of worship. One of the things I've told you guys over and over again, the Arabs believed in Allah. They never denied that Allah is the creator. They used to refer to him as the creator of the Kaaba. The Arabs, originally, they were following the religion of Prophet Ibrahim and his son Ismail. But after Ismail died, they did what people do. They deviated away from worshiping Allah alone to attributing partners with him. If you were to ask Abu Jahl, if you were to have asked Abu Lahab, if you were to have asked even the prophet's mother, Aminah, or his father, Abdullah, does Allah exist? They would have said yes. But none of them believed that he was the only one worthy of worship. They worshiped him, and they also made their other gods. And they made other idols and made them equal to him. And so did the prophet's mother and father. The prophet's mother and father were not Muslims. The prophet's mother and father were pagans. They deviated away from the religion of Ismail. And instead, they worshiped many gods. And that's why the prophet's mother and father, they are in hell. The prophet's mother and father are not going to be in paradise. Allah is clear. He tells us anyone who dies upon any way other than Islam, it will never be accepted. And they will be in hell, in hell, in hell. And we can't say that they didn't know about Allah, because they did. They chose to worship idols along with him, just like Abu Talib, just like Abu Jahl, just like most of those Arabs did. So that it's not that they didn't know the truth. They knew the truth and refused to accept it. Everybody understand that? So this is a very important point. People don't like to speak the truth. We can't sugarcoat the religion. We can't make up lies. The truth is the truth. A man asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam one day, he said, "O Prophet of Allah, where's my father?" And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Your father is with my father, and they're both in hell." That hadith is authentic. It's Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. And we all know that Allah speaks in the Quran about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam trying to make dua for his mother. Allah tells him, you cannot make dua. You can't pray for somebody who's already in hell because they chose to disbelieve in me. Okay? So it's not that his parents didn't know about Allah. They knew about Allah. The messenger sent to them was Ismail. Okay? Alayhi salam. But they chose to reject his teachings, just as a lot of people today choose to reject the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I had to make that point. So now, bear with me. Bear with me as I go back to the let me take that off. Bear with me as I go back to the putting this up for the Zoom room people. Zoom people, here we go. You guys should be able to, when I do put this on, you should be able to see. And now let me go back to the Zoom here and let everybody see me here. Let's check here. Okay. This is me. Okay. Hold on. Give me a second. I know this just takes patience, guys. It's a new way of streaming that I'm doing, and I got to do it this way. Oh, I'm not going to Zoom. That's right. We're going to the PowerPoint. Okay, the PowerPoint, not Zoom. Okay, got mixed up. Okay, here I come. I'm getting ready to come as, hold on, PowerPoint, not Zoom. Wait a minute. Wait. There. Ready? Here it is. That's PowerPoint. Okay, now you guys can see it. Let me make it larger. And give me a second. Okay, there. Everybody should be able to see me now. See the PowerPoint. All right, so this is a very important point, that we need to understand. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's mother and his father did not believe that Allah is the only one worthy of worship. They were pagans. They worshiped other idols alongside with him, but they would refer to Allah as being the Lord of the Kaaba, the Lord of the Kaaba. So each day and each night, Barakah stayed beside Aminah. In fact, Barakah tells us, I used to sleep at the foot of her bed, and I would hear her groaning at night. I would hear her sobbing at night as she would call out for her absent husband. Her moans and her cries would wake me up, and I would try to comfort and give her courage. After some months went past, the first part of the caravan that left for Syria came back. And when the people in Mecca heard that this caravan had arrived, everybody flew to where the Kaaba is to welcome loved ones. Barakah too secretly went to the house of Abdul Muttalib to find out if Abdullah had come back, but she didn't hear any news about him. So she went back home to Aminah, but she didn't tell her whether he had arrived or not because she didn't want to upset her. As the days went by, the rest of the caravan eventually returned, but Abdullah was not with them. Barakah went to the house of Abdul Muttalib, and that's when the news came that Abdullah had died. He had died in Syria. She said, when I heard this news, I began to scream because I could only imagine what this would do. She said to the lady, Aminah. But anyway, she went back to Aminah's house, shouting and crying out. And Aminah had heard what had happened to Abdullah. And Aminah too was very heartbroken. Okay, let me check to make sure that my screen has not frozen again, because I didn't see it with you guys. I want y'all to see these PowerPoints. Let me get back. I know this can be messed up, but hey, I gotta make sure it's working. Okay. Okay. So inshallah, you guys can see this. Okay, Barakah tells us too, guys, that when Aminah found out about the death of her husband, as she was only wedded to for a couple of weeks, she was so distraught. She was so sad. You know, it was very hard for her to come to reality with it. But anyway, she carried out her pregnancy. And when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born, she gave birth to him, and Barakah was the first person to hold the Prophet in her arms because she was there to help his mother get through the birth. And after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born, his grandfather Abdul Muttalib took him to the Kaaba, and all of Mecca celebrated his birth. Barakah stayed with Aminah and took care of her while the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sent to the desert, which was the custom back then, to be nursed by the lady Halima. And he stayed with the Halima as his wet nurse for 5 years. Then he was brought back to Mecca, and Aminah, his mother, received him with love. And Barakah too welcomed him with love and joy and admiration. She then goes on to tell us that when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was 6 years old, and this is something, guys, that is so sad. I mean, we think about it. You know, this woman and this little kid, you know, he never got to meet his father, subhanallah. She tells us when he was 6 years old, that's when his mother decided that she wanted to go to visit the grave, of her husband, subhanallah, in Medina, because that's where Abdullah, the Prophet Muhammad's father, was buried. He was buried in Medina because he died on the way back from Syria. So both Barakah and Abdul Muttalib tried to convince Aminah to not go because she never healed from having the baby. She never got over her heartbreak. She was too weak physically, and that was a long journey. It could take up to 2 weeks to travel from Mecca to Medina. But Aminah was determined. So one morning, Aminah gathered Barakah, and she had a camel. She, Barakah, and the baby Muhammad, they got on a howdah, which is what they would use to ride a camel, and they left with a caravan that was going to Syria. And to protect the child from any pain, Aminah didn't tell the little boy that he was 5 at this time, that he was going to visit the grave of his father. It took 10 days to travel from Mecca to Syria, and then from Syria to Medina. That took a total of 10 days. And when they arrived in Medina, the little boy was left with his uncles, while Aminah went to visit the grave of his father, her husband Abdullah. And they say, Barakah says that each day she would sit by that grave, crying, talking to it, grieving over the death of her husband. And this is why, guys, in Islam, you know, women, we have a hard time with our emotions. If going to a grave is going to cause you to reminisce and cry and talk to the dead and all of that, you should stay home, because the dead cannot hear us. The dead cannot see us. You know, if we can't control ourselves, you can make dua for a person from home. So anyway, eventually, the lady Aminah decided to go back to Mecca. So she and Barakah and the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was only around 5 or 6 at that time, they got on their camel and began a trip back home. But on the way home, Aminah became sick with a fever. And let's talk about this here for a minute too. I'm getting ready to switch back. I know y'all probably sick of it, but hey, I got to look at the screen and look at y'all. Okay, hold on. Let me take that down. Let me put this back up. This is really crazy. This is Layla. What can I say? I don't have nobody to help me, so it's just me. Okay, hold on. Okay, here I am. There. Let's talk about this. For those of you who don't know, when you make Hajj, some people, times when people go to make Hajj, if you are part of your package, they might take you, it's not part of the Hajj ritual, but you might get to go visit Medina. That's a long drive. It's not close. It takes hours to drive from Mecca to Medina. Okay? And the climate is different. Mecca is miserable because it's nothing but sand, rocks, mountains. Medina is different. Medina has some foliage, some plant life, and the temperature is not the same. So a lot of times, if you go from Mecca to Medina, people get sick. You get sick because the change in climates. That's why a lot of people, they'll say, I went to Mecca, then I went to Medina, and now I'm sick. The change in climates, you get allergies and you get a fever. You can go into a cold, the flu, because it's different climate. Even when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam migrated, when he migrated from Mecca, when the Muslims migrated from Mecca to Medina, remember a lot of them got sick. And that's when the Prophet made dua, asking Allah to make Medina a sanctity. Because when the companions left Mecca, they didn't like Medina because of the climate. It was different. And many of them were in the hospital sick. So the Prophet made dua sanctifying it. So that's what happened here. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's mother, who already was not that strong, she already had a weak immune system. On the way back, she got sick. It started with coughing, a fever, and she's very, very sick now. Okay, so let's take a look and see what happened after that. Let's see. Let me try this again. Here I go. The Zoom people should be okay. It's you guys. Okay, here we go. There's my PowerPoint. Let me come back to you guys here. Do my screen share. Go back to Barakah. Allow. Go back here to that. Okay, you guys should, inshallah, be able to see. There it is. A little bit of lag, but alhamdulillah, you can see. Okay, so on the way back to Medina, Aminah became very sick. It started off with a fever. And when they got to a place called El Abwa, that's when her health began to deteriorate even more. And her fever was so high that she called out for Barakah. She was choking. In fact, Barakah tells us, this is all from Barakah's own words. She says she was choking from the fever. That's how, she couldn't even catch her breath. She called out to Barakah and she said to her, "Oh, Barakah, I'm going to leave this world shortly." She said, "I'm leaving my son. I'm going to trust my son in your care." She said, "He lost his father when he was still in my stomach. Now he's about to lose his mother." She said, "Take care of him, Barakah. Promise me. Promise me." She said, "Swear to me that you will be a mother to him. Swear to me that you will never leave him." So Barakah tells us her heart was shattered and she began to cry, but she made the promise. She said, I promise I'll be a mother to him, and I promise I'll never leave him." And that's when the little boy, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, entered into the room where his mother was, and he threw himself on his mother and held on to her, and she died with him holding on to her. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam witnessed the death of his mother. Okay? And Barakah tells us that she began to cry. It was so sad. And the thing that's so beautiful, guys, is she was the one. She dug a grave in the sand with her own hands and buried her mother Aminah. His mother Aminah with her own hands. And then Barakah got on top of the camel, put the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam on the camel with her, and she went to Mecca alone by herself. And when she arrived in Mecca, Abdul Muttalib took her and him in to live with him, and she stayed in the house of Abdul Muttalib, and her job was to honor the oath that she swore to his mother. She cared for the Prophet as if he was her son. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam became very attached to her. She said 2 years later, 2 years after the death of Aminah, Abdul Muttalib died. And then that's when she and the Prophet Muhammad went to live with Abu Talib. And even then, she continued to look after the Prophet Muhammad. She kept her word to his mother. She cared for him as if he were hers. In fact, she took care of him until he was all grown up. And in fact, she continued to be with him until after he married Khadijah, radiyallahu anha. So here we can see the Prophet was a man 20 years old. And Barakah was still with him. And he still looked at her as a mother. And when he married Khadijah, Barakah then moved in. She moved in with him and Khadijah. So the prophet was that close to her. He looked at her as his mom. So he said, you got to stay with me and my wife. And she did. She moved in with him. And by the way, this picture I have here, this is probably how the house of Khadijah may have looked, radiallahu anha, minus the new modern stuff. This picture I found here, this is a picture of an ancient wealthy person's home in Arabia. Of course, they did some upgrading to it to make it more modern, but her home, this is how the houses look of a person that was wealthy. They would have a courtyard and rooms and all of that. Okay, this one's been upgraded with levels and stuff like that, but look at the bottom part, the square part. It was probably large like that with a courtyard, because Khadijah was wealthy and it was a big house. Barakah stayed with the prophet and Khadijah. She said, I never left him and he never left me. One day, she tells us, the prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to her and he said, Ya Ummah, that means mother. She said, he always called me mother. He said, Ya Ummah. He said, now I am a married man. You've never been married. He said, what do you think if someone should come now and ask to marry you? Barakah said, she looked at the prophet and said, I will never leave you. She said, a mother never abandons her son. And the prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam smiled and kissed her head. And he looked at Khadijah and said, oh, Khadijah, this is Barakah. This is my mother after my own mother. And she is all of my family. So this beautiful hadith, Barakah tells us of the love that her and the prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had for each other. It was like mother and son. Barakah tells us that the prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made this statement. Khadijah jumped in it too. She said, oh, Barakah, you have sacrificed all your youth to take care of Muhammad. She said, now he wants to pay you back. She said, please, Barakah, for my sake and for his, agree to be married before you're too old to even get married. So here you can see the prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Khadijah encouraging Barakah, to find a life for herself. And when Khadijah said this, Barakah said, she asked her, well, who will I marry? And that's when Khadijah said, well, there's a person here named Ubaid. Ubaid, the son of Zaid, from the Khazraj tribe of Medina. He has come to us asking for your hand in marriage. She said, please don't refuse him. Barakah said, oh, he seems like a nice candidate. And so Barakah agreed. And her and Ubaid were married. And she went with him to live in Medina. So here we can see Khadijah, radiallahu anha, and the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, were still in Mecca. And Barakah finally got married and moved to Medina to be with her new husband. And that's when she had a baby. She had a son from Ubaid, whom she named Ayman. And that's how Barakah got her kunya, or her nickname, which is Ayman, which means the mother of Ayman. But after giving birth, her marriage didn't last long. Why? Because her husband died. And after her husband died, she returned back to Mecca to live with her son, the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the home of Khadijah. And at that time, this is when the Prophet had living with him, his cousin Ali, Also, Khadijah's daughter. Remember, we talked about how Khadijah had a daughter named Hind from her first husband. So it was Ali, it was Hind, and Zaid ibn Haritha. And we talked about Zaid. Zaid was another slave that Khadijah had bought from the slave market to be a companion to the prophet. And the prophet ended up adopting him as his son. But Zaid was Arab. He was an Arab from the tribe of Qab, who was captured as a boy and brought to Mecca to be sold. Okay? And we talked about how Zaid's father had came to try to get him back, but Zaid chose to stay with the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So anyway, when Barakah returned from Medina after losing her husband, she moved back in the house with the Prophet and Khadijah, and it was also Ali at the time, and Hind, Khadijah's daughter, oldest daughter, and Zaid. Okay. Somebody in the Zoom room, I can't touch the screen. Get that person off the mic. Okay, later, we talked about how Zaid was purchased as a slave, but later the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, freed him. It wasn't too long after coming back to Mecca that the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, received the call to prophethood. This is when Allah sent the angel Jibril to tell the prophet that he had received the call to prophethood. Barakah and Zaid, Ali, all of them, they were among the first people to accept that he was a prophet of Allah, and they all swore their allegiance to him. Okay? And they were with the early Muslims who were persecuted by the Quraysh. But now, how many of you knew this? Like I tell you guys, a lot of people exclude certain parts of history. A lot of men come to the West because the Arabic women know their history. Arab women are very, very proud women. They know their history. They don't consider themselves oppressed and deprived and depraved. Only you Western women do. But you allow these men to come here and give you Western women part of the truth. How many of you knew that when the Muslims bore the persecution, Barakah and Zaid were hired to be like spies? They were part of an intelligence service that the Prophet created. Barakah and Zaid, being that they were both slaves, ex-slaves, they used their positions as ex-slaves because back then social status was everything. They used their status of being ex-slaves and allowed themselves to be exposed and persecuted and punished just to gain information as to what plans and what conspiracies Abu Jahl, Abu Lahab, and Abu Sufyan and them were coming up with. They don't tell y'all that. Okay? That's why you got to learn the hadiths. You learn the hadiths, you read these hadiths, you see this. So Barakah exposed herself to persecution. She put herself in harm's way so she could gather information to take back to the Prophet as to what plans Abu Sufyan and the others were making against the Muslims. And Zayd did the same thing. We also have this. One night, the unbelievers blocked the roads leading to the house of Arqam. The house of Arqam, this is where the Prophet and the converts would meet to learn about the religion. And like I said, Barakah served as a secret service person, her and Zaid. They used their downtrodden position and endured persecution just to hear what the Quraysh were planning. Well, one night, the Quraysh had blocked off the roads leading to the house of Arqam, where the Prophet had gathered his companions. Barakah had some urgent information from Khadijah, because Khadijah too was part of this intelligence service. Barakah had received urgent information from Khadijah to take back to the Prophet. She risked her life trying to reach the house of Arqam. And when she arrived and gave the Prophet the message from Khadijah, he smiled and he said, "You are blessed, Ayman, and you will have a place in paradise." So how many of you knew that Ayman, Barakah, she was also one of the companions given the good news of paradise? She was also given the good news of paradise. All of these hadiths are authentic. They can be found in Bukhari, in Muslim, and in Muwatta. Subhanallah. It's just that, again, you can't teach yourself the deen. You have to learn it from a person of knowledge who knows these hadiths and knows how to put them together for you to give you the story. Because people come to the West and they exclude this from you women in the West. So when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told her that she would have a place in paradise, Ayman was happy, even though she was almost killed, trying to get that message back to him from Khadijah. And when she left, that's when the Prophet looked at the companions who were in the house of Arqam. And he said, "If any one of you wants to marry a woman from paradise, marry Barakah Ayman." This hadith is authentic, Bukhari and Muslim. So she was given the good news of paradise. And when the Prophet made this statement, a lot of people remained quiet, because Ayman was not beautiful. You know, she was dark in color, and a lot of the men didn't view her to be attractive. She was skinny, she was very thin, very dark, and the men didn't view her to be attractive. And also, look at her age. Some of the companions say that she was close to 50 years old at this time. She was close to 50. She was an elderly woman. So when the Prophet said, "If any of you would like to marry a woman from the people of paradise, you should marry her," nobody said anything. Then finally, Zaid, the adopted son of the Prophet, he stood up and he said, "O Messenger of Allah, I will marry Ayman. By Allah, she is better than women who surpass her in grace and beauty." So subhanallah, you know, Zaid, see how good he was. He was able to look beneath the surface of things and realize that this woman had character. It's not the face that appeases Allah. It's not the way we look. It's not how much money we have. It's our deeds, our righteousness. This is a woman that put her life. She was almost 50 years old, but she would put her life on the line every day and allow the Quraysh to beat her and abuse her just so she could get information as to what they were planning to take back to the Prophet. So Zaid volunteered to marry her. And Zaid and Ayman were married. And as you guys know, they had a son named Usama. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam loved Usama as if he was his own. He looked at Usama as like being his own son. He used to play with him. He used to kiss him. He would feed him with his own hands. And from an early age, Usama, like his mother and like his father, distinguished himself in the service of Islam too. Subhanallah. It's all about good breeding. We got to be careful who we choose to marry. A lot of you brothers ask about marrying a Christian woman. Why would you want to marry a kafir? A kafir can't encourage you to go to paradise. A kafir doesn't believe what we believe. What good is she going to serve you in this world and the next? And any children that you have, your children will be confused. As the prophet said, the children usually take on the religion of their mother. So you marry a kafir woman, you can forget about having a Zaid or an Ayman. You're going to have a Sally Ann who'll be going to Catholic school, doing the Nicki Minaj and the Cardi B. Y'all better think about the choices you made, because these companions, they looked beneath all that surface stuff. When the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam migrated to Medina, and to show how also she helped with the dawah. When the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam migrated, when the migration came, they left Mecca for Medina. The Prophet left Ayman behind to look after his affairs in his home. Here she was, almost 50. She stayed back, still doing her intelligence. Eventually, she migrated to Medina, and she migrated on her own because she worked in this special intelligence. She snuck and migrated on her own. I told you guys, some of these women, these female companions, were like ninjas. Some of them were swordswomen. Well, Ayman was of an intelligence. She could spy and gather information. So could Sauda. Okay? She could travel stealthily at night. She could find her way at night. She could find her way around. So the Prophet knew that she'd be okay by herself there. And he knew that she would make it to Mecca on her own well. And make it to Medina on her own well. And make it to Medina she did. When she arrived in Medina, her feet were sore and swollen, and her face was covered in dust. And this hadith is a hadith that makes me cry every time I read it. What's the source? What's the source? Sahih Bukhari. They say that when Ayman arrived in Medina, her feet were sore and swollen, and her face was covered with dirt and sand. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sitting with his companions talking. When he saw her, he jumped up. He ran to her. He said, Ya Ayman, Ya Ayman. Oh, my mother. Oh, my mother. Ya Ummi, Ya Ummi. Oh, my mother. He said, indeed, there is a home for you in paradise. And he wiped her face with his hands. He wiped the sand from her eyes. And then he set her down and he began to massage her feet. And then he began to rub her shoulders. And he kept saying over and over again, Ya Ummi, Ya Ummi, my mother, my mother. Subhanallah. I tell y'all, this is why I had that talk a week ago with Moses. You see why I had that talk with Moses, Fresno? I had a talk with Moses. I had to tell him, sorry, it ain't gonna work out. I know we've been promised for 30 years, but I broke up with Moses. I told him, since I've been teaching about the wives of the prophet, since I've been teaching about the companions of the prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I can't marry you no more, Moses. I'm marrying the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You can't help but fall in love with him, guys. Remember, you will never be a believer until you love the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, more than you do even yourself. The only way you can develop that love for him is by learning about him. Learning how he interacted with his companions, learning what type of husband he was, what a son he was, what a friend he was. You can't help but love him. It'll make this world seem like nothing for you sisters out there who cry because you don't have a husband. You cry because some man broke your heart. Welcome to the Broken Hearts Club. Fall in love with the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The men of this world are nothing. They're nothing like him. They're not worth your tears. They're not worth any of that. Subhanallah. That's how you deal with a broken heart. Learn about these companions, the best of this nation, and develop a love for them. And then you'll find it easy to accept the qadr of Allah. If it's his qadr that you stay single. Me and Moses, we broke up. Everybody know that. But I did tell him that Latifa is available. Okay? All right. So, once she arrived in Medina, Ayman, Barakah, she played her full part in the affairs of the Muslims. Look at the picture I'm using. Look at the picture I'm using. Look at the picture I'm using. I got this picture off the internet. This is how some of the Arabic women back in the medieval period would dress if they served what Ayman served as central intelligence. Ayman, she would go out, gather information, spy, gather information. She would dress like this. So you think that you couldn't tell if she was woman or man. They all covered their face. The men and women when they were gathering information. Okay? They had swords on their backs, knives in their boots. Well, Ayman continued to play her central intelligence role even in Medina. She was present. I want y'all to know all these hadiths are in Sahih Bukhari. She participated in the Battle of Uhud. During the Battle of Uhud, she not only fetched water for the soldiers, she not only helped to treat the people who were injured, but how many of you know, and this is right in Bukhari, during the Battle of Uhud, when the men abandoned their post, when they heard this rumor that the Prophet had been killed, Ayman picked up some dirt and threw it in the face of some the fugitives, the men that ran away, and said, "Give me your sword and you spin." And she took the sword, her and several other women. I'm going to talk about them too. One of them was the aunt of the Prophet. Her and several other women, they ran onto the battlefield to fight because the men ran away. And this is Bukhari. So this misconception that people tell you the women weren't even fighting, that's a lie. Arab women were trained. As Hakam, and I'm going to do her story too. As Hakam said, we are women of the tents. We are trained to use a pole. We can wield a sword. We can wield a pole. Arab women were trained. They didn't sit at home making babies, sewing clothes, licking pus. They were out there too. And if the men ran away, they'd pick up a sword. They'd pick up a pole and they'd go out there and jihad. As a result, she ended up injured by an arrow. One of the Quraysh shot her with an arrow. She also participated at the Battle of Khaybar. She was with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam there and helped at the Battle of Khaybar. All of these hadiths are in Bukhari and Muslim and Muwatta. Okay? Ayman, her son. A lot of people may ask, what happened to her first son by her first husband? Well, her son, Ayman, he too was a devoted companion of the Prophet. He was killed at Hunain in the 8th year after the migration. As all of you know, her husband Zaid, radiallahu anha, was killed at the Battle of Mu'tah in Syria. Okay? Barakah at this time was 70 years old. And when her husband Zaid died, she had spent most of her time at home because she was too old. She was tired after doing all that spying and helping and fighting on that battlefield when she did and stuff. That stuff took its toll on her. Okay? So she was around 70 when Zaid was killed at the Battle of Mu'tah in Syria. After the Prophet, after Zaid was killed, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, along with Abu Bakr and Umar, they would come and visit her regularly. And the Prophet would say, Ya Ummi, oh mother, are you okay? And she will say, yes, I am fine, O Messenger of Allah, as long as Islam is. And this hadith is in Sahih Muslim. So even though Zaid was killed, Barakah stayed home, but the Prophet and Abu Bakr and Umar would come and check on her. And she never complained. She would always say, as long as Islam is okay, I am okay. After the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had died, Barakah could often be seen with tears running down her face. One day, Abu Bakr and Umar came to visit her, and they asked her, why are you crying, Barakah? She said, I'm not crying because the Prophet is gone. She said, I knew that he would one day leave us. She said, the reason I am crying is because there will be no more revelations from Allah sent down to us. And Abu Bakr and Umar broke down and started crying too with her. So that shows she loved the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but she loved Allah even more. This is wala wal bara. Our allegiance is to Allah first and foremost. Then it's to the Prophet. Then it's to each other. Remember we talked about how these companions, they understood the concept of allegiance and first, and then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, as to when Ayman died, again, I told you guys last week, no one can give you a clear-cut date as to when she died. Allah kept that information away from us because he didn't want us to do what the Christians did and make saints out of these companions by worshiping them. We have two different reports. There are some hadiths that say that she died 5 months after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But According to Ibn Saud, she lived until the early days of the Caliphate of Uthman. And that's from Tabarani. So I think I go with that view. Because if she had died 5 months after the Prophet, she would have died around the same time as Fatima, radiallahu anha. And there is no mention of that happening